some of the principals who are involved in this whole now really complicated disclosure movement. And the question is, what do we want? What do people want? I think most people are looking for disclosure in the sense of the president sitting across the desk in the Oval Office saying, they're here. That's sort of a lot of people's assumed bottom line. I think that, well, I'm not going to get into what I think. This is so complex. It's the most complex single experience the human species has ever had, by far. It represents a total change in what human life is. It's that big. Now let's go to start with the tech billionaires who have become interested in this because they all see remarkable technology and they want to get that technology and emulate it. Now, this is exactly what the DoD has been trying to do for 60 years. And it's a boom of failures so far. And the Chinese and the Russians have been trying to do it also. And each group has had some successes, small successes, but basically nothing huge, no breakthroughs. And there's something wrong. And I think what's wrong is something I say to the people who are working on the materials every time I get my chance to. When you work on these materials, look at these materials, remember they're looking back at you. They're looking back at you. And that's because this isn't about just technology. It's about that timeless experience that you had. It's about living and functioning from that level. And that is when that tech will make sense. So what are we going to get, do you think, from psionics guys and people with dog whistles, as they call them, calling up flying saucers or orbs and stuff? Are they going to get anything from that? getting ready to talk about some of the principles who are involved in this now really complicated disclosure movement. And the question is, I want to go back to the mention that you had of being outside of time, because this is very critical. When you're outside of time, that means your ego is shut down, because we are in the time stream, and our ego is what keeps us here. When the ego is shut down, everything changes. That's when you take LSD, for example. The parts of the brain that maintain the ego get they literally get paralyzed by LSD, and all hallucinogenics are the same way. And you end up seeing in some cases, very, like with ayahuasca, it's a much more sophisticated thing than LSD, which is, ayahuasca is something that was developed by people with high levels of spiritual understanding, which is why often on ayahuasca people will go to a very specific place, or DMT is the same way. But LSD was a scientific, created by scientists who didn't know about that. So the experience that it gives you is kind of random. But you went out of time on your own, and you had an awareness, therefore, of the sacredness of this experience. Now, my question becomes, do you have any idea why you went out of time?